leaders will give you more territory to lead. When you have less capable leaders, will give you less territory.
第二，藩属国每年都要向宗主国进贡，就是你要把你们国家的好东西送到这个中央王朝来，所以它也是一种朝贡体系，就是它每年要进贡。
Secondly, the vassal countries need to provide offerings to the suzerain countries each year, and that is done annually.
但是每年送贡品的这个官员带回去的，皇上对他的赏赐要多几十倍。他比如那会儿琉球，开一条船来到那个中原，带一船东西回去10条船。
However, it is always a good bargain for the representatives from the vessel, and because the representative would always take back more than tenfolds of good stuff from the emperor. For example, if a representative is bringing one ship of good stuff from Liuqiu Island, and he would actually bring back 10 vessels worth of goods back.
第三，就是中央王朝有责任保护藩属国的安全，出了问题，中央就要派军去帮助他，这是你的责任。
Thirdly, the emperor has the responsibility to protect the vassal regions. When there are security threats, the central government needs to dispatch military troops to protect the vessel. It is their responsibility.
第四，藩属国有充分的主权和自由。
And number 4, the vassal regions have full autonomy and freedom.
中国的皇帝要的就是个名义，一种满足感。
And the Chinese emperor only wanted this very honorable title and is a sense of fulfillment.
毛泽东看的中国古书啊，太多了。
And Chairman Mao Zedong has read many Chinese classic texts.
我敢这样说，他比一般的中国的历史学家读的中国的古书都要多。陈坚，你说是不是？
他读的史比你我2个人和我们这里所有的做中国历史加在一起还要多。
但是他古书主要是读《资治通鉴》。
24，还有野史，他要读野史。
又是一个好会。
And I dare to say that the total number of classic books that Mao Zedong read exceed all the classic Chinese books that all our historians here have read. And then there's a discussion among the 3 scholars that whether he only read formal, official historical records, or he also read some informal, unofficial historical records.
所以你要理解毛泽东，你多少得读点中国的古书。
So in order to understand Mao Zedong, you need at least to read some Chinese classic texts.
天朝观念就是毛泽东继承下来一个他对待中国周边国家的一个主要的理念。
And Mao Zedong has apparently inherited this concept of celestial or heavenly empire, and that is a major concept that he had regarding ruling China.
我请大家注意一个问题：从1950年，就是中华人民共和国建立以后，一直到90年代。中国签订的所有的陆地边界条约，都是中国让步，都是中国在双方有争议的领土当中，都是中国做出了比较大的让步，有的多，有的少，但都是中国做出的让步。
I ask you to look at one phenomenon here. Between 1950 and 1990s, That's which after People's Republic China was founded till the 1990s. Among all the treaty or the border treaties of inland areas between China and other countries, China always kind of taken a concession point of view. And whenever there are confrontations, it was always China who made compromise, be it a bigger compromise or a smaller compromise.
我给你讲一个中国古代皇帝的故事，然后讲一个毛泽东的故事，都跟领土有关，你就知道他们俩的想法特别相近。
I would like to share with you a story about an ancient emperor and a story of Mao Zedong. Both are about their attitude regarding territories. After you hear these two stories, you probably understand why I say they share very similar ideas.
清朝雍正6年，这个越南王和这个云南王，他们两个为一块土地发生了争执。
And during the Yunzhong Emperor's time, and this is the 6th year into his ruling, that the leader of Vietnam and the leader of Yunnan came into a confrontation.
这个争议的这块土地呢是有120里，当时雍正呢就大笔一挥，就给了越南王80里，给了云南王40里。
And this land dispute involved 120 li area. And Emperor Yunzhong made this decision very quickly. He gave the leader of Vietnam 80 li and gave Yunnan 40 li.
云南王没有说什么，说他就同意了。但是越南王呢上了个折子，觉得应该那个40里也应该给他。
Yunnan, the leader of Yunnan took it without any argument. However, the leader of Yunnan was not happy. He wrote a proposal to the emperor and asked to get that 40 li as well.
雍正就不高兴了，他拿御笔批了一大段话。
And Emperor Yunzhong was very displeased, and he wrote a long paragraph of comment.
朕统御寰宇，意思就是说，我这天下土地都是我的，我愿意给谁给谁。我给越南就是外藩，给云南就是内地，如此而已。
And in his comment, Emperor Yunzhong said that the land in the universe all belong to me. It is up to me who I want to give it to. If I decide to give it to Vietnam, it means that I'm happy to give it to a vassal region. If I decide to give it to Yunnan province, then I'm simply giving it to a domestic province.
这40里地，你们还争什么？有什么好争的？
There is no point arguing over only a 40 li area.
这个云南王赶快上了一个折子，说啊，我们其实非常感谢中央这么照顾我们，我们这个一定世世代代守好这块土地。
And after learning the position of the emperor, the leader of Yunnan immediately submitted a proposal saying that we greatly appreciate the central government caring to us, and for generations we will protect this land.
雍正啊，一看这个奏表，哈哈大笑。哎，既然这样，那40里你就拿去吧，替朕永守之。
And after seeing this proposal, the Yunzhong emperor was extremely glad, and he laughed. He outburst a laugh, and he said, now that I see you understand me, I'll give you that 40 li as well. You keep it for me.
然后再讲一个毛泽东的故事。
Now it's the story of Mao Zedong.
不太明白说，因为视察这个中文词在中国的意思是上级到下级检查工作叫视察。
And Jiang Zemin was not happy with the wording, inspection, because inspection in Chinese means that it is activity done from the superior to an inferior.
那你一个朝鲜领导人到东北，怎么叫视察？说您那不是视察，是访问。
And he was questioning the North Korea. You are being a leader of North Korea. How can you use the word inspection when you go to the northeast region? It is not inspection. It is simply a visit.
不，视察。我爸跟我说的，东北都是我们的。
The North Korean leader insisted on using the word inspection because he said, "My father told me so. The entire northeast region belonged to us."
江泽民就更晕了，说：“我说其实这话也不是我爸说的，是毛主席跟我爸说的。”
Jiang Zemin became even more confused, and then the Korean leader said, "Actually, this was not from my father. After all, it was what Chairman Mao told my father." So.
江泽民就停止了那个谈话，他谈不下去了，就是赶快下来找中央联络部部长朱良。
And Jiang Zemin stopped there because he couldn't continue. Immediately he went to seek the advice from the Central Government Liaison Director, Zhu Liang.
我说朱部长啊，今天金正日来说了什么什么，说这些话都是毛主席说的，你赶快查一查，毛是不是说过这些话？
And he asked the Minister Zhu and said, "Today the Korean leader said so and so, and he told me that these were all said by Chairman Mao. Can you please just investigate and see if that was the truth?"
第二天，朱良报告总书记查过了，毛主席确实说过这种话，而且不止一次。
And the second day, Mr. Zhu reported to Jiang Zemin by saying, "Secretary General, I did investigate. Chairman Mao did say that, and not by only once. He said it multiple times."
我在写这本书的时候查了一下，从1958年到1964年，毛泽东就提到中朝领土问题和东北问题，一共讲了5次类似的话。
While I was writing this book, I did research into the period between 1958 and 1964 and found that Mao Zedong has mentioned and had such remarks 5 times regarding China-North Korea relations as well as the northeast regions.
其中有2层意思，一层讲领土问题，一层讲管辖的问题。
There are 2 layers of meanings involved. One is regarding territory, the second is regarding jurisdiction.
他说：“你们的祖宗说中朝边界在辽河，我们的祖宗说中朝边界在鸭绿江。说你看现在都把你们赶到鸭绿江南边去了，怪可怜的。”
He said that to the Koreans by saying, "Your ancestors said that the border between China and Korea is Liao River. Our ancestors said that the border is actually Yalu River. And so poor you, now that you've been all expelled to the south of Yalu River."
但这不是我的错，是封建主义欺负了你们。这些坏事儿都是唐太宗、武则天、隋炀帝都是他们干的。
But this is not my fault. If you want to blame somebody, it is a feudal society ruler's fault. It is this emperor in the Tang Dynasty and this female empress and the emperor in Sui Dynasty. Blame them.
我不是把天池给你们了吗？
But see, I have already given you the Tianchi area.
长白山上有一个湖。
Heaven Lake.
Yes, that's a Heaven Lake. That's a lake on the rough understanding of Chinese leaders' views on its neighboring countries.
对，它不是一个，就是中国从传统上讲，从历史上讲，中国不是一个扩张的国家。
And historically speaking, or traditionally speaking, in history, China is not a country of expansion.
否则的话，你很难理解长城是中国的标志。
if you do not understand this, you had a hard time understanding why the Great Wall is a symbol of China.
中国皇上要求的都是名义上的统治权。
And that all the Chinese historic emperors asked was this nominal ruling power.
在毛泽东看来，金日成就是沈阳军区司令。
And according to Mao Zedong, Kim Il-sung is just a commander-in-chief of the Shenyang city military.
你都是我的，给你点地算什么？
And you, as a commander-in-chief of a region, is under me. And why do I care? I can just easily just give you some land.
但是金日成真的，朝鲜真的是中国的吗？金日成真的是中国的吗？不是，人家就喊2句万岁而已。
However, could we really think that Korea belonged to China and Kim Il-sung was part of China? Not really. And they were just there to call long life, Chairman Mao. That's it.
这就是天朝观念。
That's a celestial or heaven empire concept I wanted to share with you.
谢谢。
Thank you.
Christian said that I should say a few words, but as you know, these are the books of Professor Seng and Professor Lee. I have some small role in making the English version. So it has been my great pleasure to have worked with Professor Lee and Professor Seng in the last 10 years. They are the two of the most prominent historians in China. In the last 10 years, now we produced 3 monographs in English. In addition to these two, there are also Mao and the Sino-Soviet Partnership, 1945-1959, a new history, which was published in 2015. We also collaborate to publish many, I would say, or numerous major articles, which were published in the English Language Journal. So what is my rule? I said I have a very small rule. So in these English manuscripts, these books and articles, Professor Lee and Professor Seng graciously granted me much freedom in deciding what I want to include in the English version, what I want to add based on my reading of secondary literature and other sources, and what I think should be included. Professor Seng's book on the history of Sino-North Korea relation was previously published in Japanese. I think that is 2015. 日本是2016年出版的。Okay. So actually, you see, the English version was first the Japanese version was first published in 2016. Then is Korean version. And then the Chinese version. But Chinese version was not published in mainland China, but published in Hong Kong. So the Chinese version, which was published by the Chinese University Press of Hong Kong, first in 2017, and then the second edition in 2018 is close to 800 pages in China, 800 pages. So it's around 700,000 Chinese words. If translated word by word into English, it will be more than twice of this book. It could be 800 or 900 pages. The Japanese and the Korean version are word by word translation. So for those who can read Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, we'll have the opportunity to know Professor Seng's complete or whole story. I know that Professor Seng is not very happy with the condensed English version. He actually complained to me a few times that why haven't I translated the entire book into English. So I hope that Columbia University will eventually issue an expanded English edition of this work in the near future. I also know that Professor Lee is going to publish her important book on the Sino-Soviet Split in Chinese in 2019. So this is a simplified Chinese English version. But Professor Lee is going to publish her complete story of Sino-Soviet Split from 1959 to 1973 next year, hopefully in mainland China. hopefully. So which will be much longer than this one. It will be over 600,000 words in Chinese and over 750 pages if translated word by word into English. So I'm not going to say how I did in these English editions. The judgment belongs to Professor Greg Berdinsky, who is going to offer his comments and your readers here. I would say that if you like these books, the credits go to Professor Seng and Professor Li. If you found error or mistake in the books, I'm solely responsible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fang. I think we're all grateful to you for a variety, even larger number of reasons now. So thank you. With that, over to Greg Berdinsky, who's someone who's really at home both in Chinese and Korean archives, and so just perfectly situated to start us off.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Christian. Thank you, Chuck, as always, for organizing this event. It's really a great honor to be seated here alongside Professor Shen and Professor Li, two people whose work I greatly admire, and also two scholars who are just incredibly generous with foreign scholars who are interested in China and travel there. So it's a great honor to be up here with them. I also want to compliment Yafeng, who has done just some excellent work in helping, yes, the books are condensed, they're translated, but I think Yafeng does a great job in making some of the points that are of most interest to people in the West who probably aren't going to read an 800-page book. I think Yafeng does a good job of making the important points shine through. Both of these books feature very deep, very exciting new research about two of China's most critical Cold War relationships. These are, of course, two relationships that have become critical to contemporary international politics as well. I'm going to start with Professor Shen's work. I'm going to flip the order. I hope that doesn't get me into trouble, and I'm not trying to, change who the leader is or anything like that. I happen to be one of the readers for Professor Shen's book, and so I read it first and was thinking about it first. Even though some of the things he said today are a little bit different from the book, and so I'm actually going to change. I gave them a script of what I said, but I'm going to go off script just a little bit for part of my comments. First of all, what was interesting in what you presented today, Professor Shen, is the way Chinese see things, or the way Mao Zedong sees things. And from what you were saying, what's really dominant is this idea of Mao as empire. And North Korea and North Korea's leadership, they are under the Chinese empire, or they're under the protection or guidance, or whatever word you want to use, leadership of the Chinese emperor. But if you look at the discourse in China-North Korean relations, you may have evidence of Mao thinking that, but the discourse is always, our countries are as close as lips and teeth. We're brothers. We share weal and woe together. So I'm wondering how that discourse, this idea of China and North Korea as close as lips and teeth, meshes with this idea of China as emperor and North Korea as basically a suzerain of or a suzerain state, I guess is the proper expression of China. So I think that's one thing, and I do think in the book, of course, you talk about how this idea of lips and teeth is a myth. But I think it's sort of argued that it's a myth because there were these different clashes but it's not necessarily always the point that these clashes come from this sort of traditional idea of China as Middle Kingdom. I also want to ask, I think you're talking about China-North Korea relations. What you presented today, I think, was heavily the Chinese perspective on China-North Korea relations, with a little bit of how Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il saw things. But I think, I would like to hear more about how did the North Koreans see this? Did they see themselves as a modern-day suzerain state? Or do they see things differently? Do they have different aspirations? I think if you look at the North Korean perspective, it also sheds a lot of light. It also sheds a lot of light on the China-North Korea relationship. I think, how does this play out? One of the interesting dynamics which I see in the book is that China and North Korea are always clashing. There's clashes between them during the Korean War over strategy. There's a clash in 1956. There's clashes that occur at a variety of different points. But what I find interesting in the China-North Korea relationship is that they always clash, but then they always kiss and make up. During the Korean War, there were these clashes, but then you have in the book this wonderful passage, after Peng De-hwai has had this intense meeting with Kim Il-sung, and they've argued, then afterwards Peng De-hwai says, but the North Koreans are really a courageous people. They deserve our respect. And then there's also this clash that occurs in 1956, which has been well documented by other historians. But briefly after this, Mao apologizes, and then China and North Korean relations reach sort of a high point in the early 1960s. So that was sort of an interesting dynamic that I observed in the book. And if you read the book, I think that will become it's something that I think shines forth very clearly in the English edition. Second, I think what you say about China and North Korea is interesting in terms of the alliance, right? Because it is an alliance. And, I wonder how some of these aspects of Mao's view of Kim Il-sung and the Chinese view of North Korea, how do they make the China-North Korea relationship different from other relationships within the Soviet, within the communist world? Because they were all supposed to be united by a common idea, revolutionary socialism, right? Or socialist internationalism. But I heard virtually zero socialist internationalism in what you just said. So I think, what does that say about socialist internationalism as an interpretive tool for relations within the communist bloc? I want to turn now to Professor Lee's book, which I also found to be just a very, very impressive book. When I first was told, actually, that Professor Lee had written a book about the Sino-Soviet Split, I was a little worried. Why? Because there's so many books about it that have come out. Lorenz Luthi, Sergei Radchenko, Austin Jerslid, Jeremy Friedman, who's sitting in the back. They've all done this very impressive work on the Sino-Soviet split. So I was thinking, how is she possibly going to say anything new about this? But she does. She has a new interpretation which I think sheds great insight into the broader nature of socialist alliances. On the one hand, how the ideals of revolutionary socialism clashes. One of the things that I really liked about the book was its thematic and chronological breakdown. One of the most interesting chapters in this book deals with the Sino-Soviet split in Korea and North Korea, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And it's sort of interesting because you've had a lot of people looking at the Sino-Soviet split and how it played out in different regions, but no one has actually put these three countries together, at least in the West. And they should be put together because, they're common geography. And I think that this book really yields insight into the appeal of Maoist models of revolution in Asia, and why the Soviets sometimes had difficulty undermining this appeal. I was going to comment actually on your title, but then I heard that your title in Chinese is different from your English title. I actually like your Chinese title better because it's in many ways a more appropriate title for the book. When I first heard that the book was called Mao and the Sino-Soviet Split, I thought, well, she must be arguing that Mao is the real driving force behind the Sino-Soviet split. But that is actually not what you're arguing at all. I think, to my mind, you actually place less blame on Mao than Lorenz Luthi or Sergei Radchenko do. And so I was thinking you should have called it something like Inevitable Differences, but I think this other title, I don't have it. They broke up and regretted breaking up is what I got from the translator, but I think that actually works better in a lot of ways. An interesting point that you make in the book, one of the arguments that you make in the book, is that the Sino-Soviet split ultimately led to the collapse of the socialist bloc, and it changed the correlation of global forces in favor of the United States. This may come as a surprise to many people in the West who still think Ronald Reagan caused the demise of the Soviet Union and communism. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying you're right, but according to your book, the final split between China and the Soviet Union occurs during the late 1960s and early 1970s. But from the American perspective, the Soviet Union doesn't seem to be getting weaker in the late 1960s and 1970s. In fact, it seems to be getting stronger during the 1970s, and this was evidenced by Soviet adventurism in Afghanistan and Africa. And so, how can you reconcile the Soviet Union's greater adventurism during the 1970s with this idea that the Sino-Soviet split is shifting the balance in favor of the West? A final point that I'm interested in your book, Professor Lee, is the relationship between international politics and domestic politics, especially when it comes to the Cultural Revolution. Most scholars start with the Cultural Revolution and then look at how the influence of the Cultural Revolution got projected outward. For instance, they often argue that the radicalism of the revolution caused China to isolate itself from the rest of the world and damaged its relationships with its neighbors. But your arguments at times seem more focused on how the international caused the domestic. You write that the Sino-Soviet split became one of the origins of the Cultural Revolution. So I wonder what you see as the most important driving force here. Did domestic politics and ideas drive China's foreign policy, or was it the opposite? I think both of these books, I've raised some questions for the authors, but I think these are, I think every great book raises big questions and raises important questions. And so I think it's really a sign of the significance of these works that you read them and they leave you with a lot more questions. They answer a lot of questions, but they also leave you with a lot of questions about the broader nature of China, China and its alliances, and China's role in the world today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg. We have a few minutes left for discussion. Maybe we can go, Chuck, I think it's okay for us to go a little bit over time. I know there were lots of questions directed at the authors, but I do want to right away kind of open it up for your comments and questions and then give the authors a chance to respond. I know there are a number of China experts in the room, some were already pointed out. That should not inhibit all of you, also the students, to ask questions, small or large.
Yeah. I have a question. I'm not sure where it should go.
Wait for the microphone.
I'm sorry. Oh, my question is,
how introduce yourself to the
yeah, Neil Silver, retired U.S. diplomat. My question is, North Korea started from 45 to the Korean War. It was a satrapy, if anything, of the Soviet Union. It was created by the Soviet occupation. So China wasn't there as a suzerain power. What was it about either the Korean War or the immediate aftermath that led, or did it lead, the Chinese leadership to believe they were in a radically different relationship with North Korea? And how was it actually seen from the North Korean side? What was going on in the reconstitution of North Korea that either involved the Russians and or the Chinese, or was totally indigenous? Just how did this thing go from this 5-6 year period when it was Russia's to a completely different situation, or was it a completely different situation?
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Yun Zhezhong. I'm from College of William and Mary, and after listening to Professor Shen's talk, I think I have a question regarding Koreans' consideration of China in the 1950s. So I read it on other books that North Korea, Kim Il-sung had a purge of Soviet faction and Chinese faction in the Korean, I think, Politburo, and also the just the party. And what do you think about North Korea's perception about China, about Mao Zedong at that period because of the purge? And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All the way in the back.
Hi, my name's Clifton Hartz. I'm just interested citizen, not affiliated with anyone. But so the authors mentioned that the Soviet Union had a revisionist change, and Mao Zedong was worried about that. So I was curious if they could go into a little more detail. What was that revisionist that they were worried about, and what caused Mao Zedong to change his perspective on the Soviet Union?
Okay, why don't we go for some responses? Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Clark Wu, a PhD student from the Catholic University of America. My question is to Professor Shen. Professor Shen just tell us a very interesting story about the king's visit to Russia in 2000. And my question is about, since China already established the formal relations with South Korea in 1992, and you mentioned in your book or some other place, so since then North Korea didn't trust the Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party since then. So I wonder why the Kim Jong-un's father, he is so naive, he still claims that the North is belong to us. I don't think the king maybe is naive to see. I think it's kind of like a test to Chinese Communist Party leaders at that time. So could you elaborate more details about that? And the second, I have a few comments about Professor Shen's last comments about the China's peaceful culture. Actually, I may disagree with that part. I don't think there is a peaceful strategic culture for China and the Middle Kingdom. It's kind of Chinese exceptionalism. The Chinese Communist Party leaders often claim the peaceful rights. You talk about the Great War, but I think for Ming Dynasty, so why the emperors, they built the Great War? Because they fight, they cannot fight. They cannot win the war with the Mongolians. it's too costly for their war with Mongolia. So that's why the reason they decided to build the Great Wall. So what, as the case for Chinese empire history is like when their power growing, they become aggressive and very militarist. But when their power decline, they become very defensive. So I don't think there is a consistent structural culture or peaceful or defensive mindset for Chinese emperors.
Thank you. Salman?
I'm Salman Khan. I teach at Tufts, and I think of myself as one of the foreign students of沈志华and Li Danhui. And I have two questions. The first is for Professor Shen. These conversations with Kim are unfolding in the shadow of the opening of the Sino-Soviet Split. And we do have documentation from the Foreign Ministry archives that suggests that diplomats in North Korea were worried about, will the North Koreans turn to Moscow versus us? So I was wondering what that context does to our understanding of what Mao's conversations with Kim really meant. And then the second question was for Professor Lee, and it's about this Lianmei Kangsudoanti, the allying with the Americans to oppose the Soviets, roughly translated. And that's what they say, but if you look at what they do, we had this whole conversation this morning about how the Chinese get anxious about the American quest for an alliance. They don't want to be allied too closely with the Americans, and they don't want to be pushed into a war with the Soviets. And in the 70s, of course, this is what gets Zhou Enlai into trouble. So I'm wondering if you could take the story forward and tell us where the turning point is, or is it just a difference between slogan and practice?
Thank you. Let's take one more question. You won't have a chance to answer them all, but I think it's good to get the questions on the table. Yeah.
This is Lambiel from the George Washington University. After listening to Professor Shen's comments about the border issues, I just came to the idea that this summer I went to Yanbian region in China, and so I made lots of friends from Korea with black passport, friends from South Korea with the green passport, and the friends from China with the red passport, all Korean people, but they belong to different countries. So I just want to have a brief comments about the historical, geographical, geopolitical importance of the Kando Yanbian region in terms of the Sino-Korean relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of questions. Maybe you can weave some of the responses together in your answers.
好吧，这个领导让我先说。
Yes, my leader asked me to start, so I will start.
几个问题我综合一下说吧。一个关于中朝血盟关系的这个说辞。说中朝血盟关系这是在中国已经流行了60年的一句话，朝鲜也是这么说。我这个书呢，主要是我这个导言讲的就是，其实这句话是一句神话，就是历史不是这样的。
The first, well, I will sum up the several questions and answer them sort of together. The first question is regarding the saying of the lip and teeth relationship between China and North Korea. China has been using this wording for 60 years, so is North Korea. And however, in the introduction book, part in my book, I mentioned that this is actually just a myth. Historically, that's not true.
1955年，苏联大使馆给外交部写了一个报告。讲当时的他们观察到的中朝关系。
In 1955, the Soviet Union embassy and submitted a report to the Foreign Affairs Office, and in it, it illustrated the China-Soviet Union relationship that it had observed.
原话是这么说的：祖国战争没有实现祖国的统一，主要是中国人在捣鬼。
And the original text goes like as the following, that our country's battle it had observed.
原话是这么说的：祖国战争没有实现祖国的统一，主要是中国人在捣鬼。
And the original text goes like as the following, that our country's battle had not achieved unification. That was due to China.
是他们不想让我们统一，他们害怕我们统一。
They didn't want us to unify. They are afraid of our unification.
我在这个书里头详细分析了朝鲜战争时期中国和朝鲜的高层之间的矛盾和分歧。
And in my book, I had written in detail the dispute between the high-level Chinese officials and North Korean officials during the Korean War.
所以我得出了一个结论：中国为朝鲜流了不少血，但是没有形成友谊。
And my conclusion was that China has shed a lot of blood for North Korea. However, no friendship was maintained.
但是就两国家利益来说，这个同盟关系是形成了，因为他们都是在社会主义阵营的这个框架内共同对付美国，所以这个同盟关系是有的。
However, just considering the national interest, we could say the allies between the two countries were founded because they were both part of the socialist bloc, and they both had this goal to fight against the United States.
但是这个同盟关系，它指的是一个外在的两国的利害关系，并不是指领导人之间的关系。
However, these alliances only existed among the leaders of the two countries. It is external, and it is only among the national interest. It is not the real relationship between the leaders of the two countries.
毛泽东曾经2次向苏联建议撤掉金日成，一次是1949年，一次是1956年。
And Mao Zedong had twice advised the Soviet Union to let go Kim Il-sung, and one was in 1949, one was in 1956.
后来他发现这个事做不成，然后他就改变了自己的做法。
But then later he found that he couldn't succeed in doing this. Then he changed.
他在中朝关系最紧张的时刻做了2件事儿，来这个收服金日成。
And during the most intensive time of the China-North Korea relationship, he did 2 things to kind of persuade Kim Il-sung.
1957年决定把所有的驻在朝鲜的中国军队全部撤回。
In 1957, he decided to withdraw all the troops, the Chinese troops based in North Korea.
1962年决定把天池和长白山让给朝鲜。
And in 1962, he decided to give the Heavenly Lake and the Changbai Mountain to North Korea.
所以我讲这个天朝观念、藩属关系是毛泽东的一种观念，就是他处理和朝鲜关系的一种理念。
So when I talk about the celestial empire or heavenly empire concept, as well as the suzerain-vassal relationship, it is a conception that Mao Zedong had when he dealt with the neighboring countries.
但实际上，为了实现这个理念，就是中朝关系实际的发展在60年当中是起伏不定的。
However, during the implementation of this concept, we actually see a lot of ups and downs in the 60 years of the bilateral relationship.
第二个，我解释一下，裴斗虎那个就是关于国际主义和这个藩属关系之间的联系。
Secondly, I wanted to answer this question about the connection between the Socialist International and the suzerain-vassal relations.
其实，在很多方面，这个国际主义的观念和中国传统的这个宗藩关系的观念是相通的。
Actually, in many ways, that this socialist internationalism and the suzerain-vassal relations share similarities traditionally.
比如无产阶级没有祖国，没有国家的观念；比如这个没有国界的观念； 中苏原来就没有国界，咱们都是兄弟，要什么国界？这些都是很相似的。
For example, for those classes, people of certain classes who do not have any possessions or properties, and they really do not have this border kind of divisions. And there are no nations, borders among them. And historically, China and Soviet Union said we do not have any borders between us.
而且1949年，斯大林就答应说，毛泽东你就是亚洲革命的领袖，他自然就形成了哇，这中央王朝又回来了。
So back in 1949, Stalin promised Mao Zedong as the leader of the Asian Revolutionary. So there automatically Mao felt that the celestial empire came back to him.
第三个，我解释一下中国和朝鲜关系、苏联和朝鲜这个三角关系到底是怎么运作的。
Thirdly, I want to talk about how this triangular relationship of China, North Korea, and Soviet Union was operated.
就中国跟朝鲜的关系啊，它有两层，一个是历史上的，一个是地理上的这种必然的联系。
And between China and North Korea relations, there are two folds. One is historical relations, the second is geographic relations.
但是朝鲜的领导人呢，却是苏联选定的。
However, the leaders of North Korea were handpicked by Soviet Union.
1956年，毛泽东跟米高扬讲了一句话，特别这个实在。
And in 1956, Mao Zedong had this remarks with Mikoyan, and this very practical comment.
金日成这棵小树啊，是斯大林栽下去的。
And this baby tree, which refers to Kim Il-sung, was planted by Stalin.
后来被你们美国人给拔起来了，抗日战争。
And then, however, this little tree was dug up by you American guys, which caused the Korean War.
我们又给栽回去了，中国出兵。
But then we put it back onto the soil, and that refers to the China's dispatch of military power.
现在长大了，不听话了。
Now it has grown; it is no longer obedient.
这个特别，你看，它又反映了毛泽东对朝鲜的这种理解，又反映了苏联、中国和朝鲜的这种关系。
And this remark is reflected that Mao Zedong was actually, he did understand the situation that North Korea was in, and at the same time, this remarks reflected this triangular relationship of the two countries.
所以就金日成来讲吧，其实金日成这个人呢是非常聪明的，而且他有比较深厚的中国传统的那种观念。
Actually, Kim Il-sung as a person is very intelligent, and also he has been influenced deeply by the Chinese traditional thinking.
一方面，他知道苏联的实力比中国强。
On the one hand, he knows that Soviet Union was stronger than China.
他自己呢，又是苏联这个指定的培养的。
And he was trained and appointed by the Soviet Union.
朝鲜的制度完全是苏联规定的。
And the North Korean system was regulated by the Soviet Union.
所以从根本上来讲，他其实更倾向于苏联。
So if we fundamentally, if we look at this from the fundamental point of view, he is more inclined to follow Soviet Union.
但是呢，他也特别知道怎么利用中国来这个对付苏联。
However, he was also very clear about how to use China to deal with Soviet Union.
特别是在这个60年代以后，就中苏关系紧张分裂以后，金日成是处理的最好的，他比越南人处理的好。
Especially in the late 60s, after China-Soviet relationship split, and he had done a good job dealing with the relationship with China, and he did a much better job than the Vietnamese.
越南就倒向苏联了，所以引起了和中国之间的战争。
North Vietnamese leaned towards Soviet Union, which caused this China-Vietnam War.
金日成始终是脚踩两只船。
However, Kim Il-sung kept putting himself onto boats, and which means he kept a relationship with both countries.
但是他能够两边得益，两边受利。
He was able to benefit on both boats.
关键的原因就是这两个大国不和。
The key reason was that because the two other big countries did not like each other.
是不是有点像现在这个情况？
Is it somehow familiar to the current situation?
最后讲一下所谓和平主义，刚才这位先生提这个。
Finally, I want to comment on this peaceful stance.
我不是讲我也没有书里头和刚才我的讲话当中也没有讲过和平主义这个概念，我讲的也不是中国的和平政策或者是侵略政策这个问题。
Well, neither in my book or in my comment earlier, I really didn't touch upon this peaceful theory or these or China's stance on keeping a peaceful relationship with others or invading others.
这个5000年的中国历史当然是有和平的时候，有战争的时候。
And in the 5,000 years of history, there was, of course, peaceful time and wartime.
而战争的目的是什么？
However, we need to look at the purpose of the wars.
如果战争的目的是为了掠夺更多的领土，它就是一种扩张。
However, if the purpose of the war is to loot more territories, then it is expansionism.
这个另外一个就是你再观察一下，凡是中国就是战争比较剧烈的时候，其实都是不是中原民族对外打，而是外族打到中国来，比如蒙古、清朝、满人。其实，在原来的意义上，他们都不是中原文化，他们是外来的打进来，但是它的结果是什么呢？是它被中原文化给吞噬了。
Well, if we observe deeper in China's war history, whenever it is the most fierce wartime in the Chinese history, it was actually not the war initiated by the Chinese people. Usually it is invasions from other races or ethnic groups, such as the Mongolians or the Manchua people. And they invade the Chinese people, and the result is usually that they were assimilated by the Chinese.
从历史上讲，中国是一个内向的国家，而不是一个外向型的国家。
So I would say historically, China is more of inward-looking nation, not a outward-looking country.
延边问题，咱们私下交流。
We can talk in private about this Yan'an issue, Yanbian issue.
好，我来回答问题。我先回答虎子的这个第一个啊，就是虎子的第一个问题就是关于说中苏分裂就把苏联搞垮了。那么你看到的是，其实70年代苏联是越来越强。我好像没有这个意思，因为如果说中苏分裂立刻就把苏联搞垮了，那么中美之间就失去了这个联合的基础，就是你失去了一个共同对付苏联这个威胁的基础，那么中美关系呢就没法再发展下去。其实啊，这个
Yeah, let me answer Greg's first question about whether the China-Soviet Union relations split has caused the collapse of Soviet Union. and you.
最后讲一下所谓和平主义，刚才这位先生提这个。
Finally, I want to comment on this peaceful stand.
我不是讲我也没有书里头和刚才我的讲话当中也没有讲过和平主义这个概念，我讲的也不是中国的和平政策或者是侵略政策这个问题。
Well, neither in my book or in my comment earlier, I really didn't touch upon this peaceful theory or these or China's stance on keeping a peaceful relationship with others or invading others.
这个5000年的中国历史当然是有和平的时候，有战争的时候。
And in the 5,000 years of history, there was, of course, peaceful time and wartime.
而战争的目的是什么？
However, we need to look at the purpose of the wars.
如果战争的目的是为了掠夺更多的领土，它就是一种扩张。
However, if the purpose of the war is to loot more territories, then it is expansionism.
这个另外一个就是你再观察一下，凡是中国就是战争比较剧烈的时候，其实都是不是中原民族对外打，而是外族打到中国来，比如蒙古、清朝、满人。其实，在原来的意义上，他们都不是中原文化，他们是外来的打进来，但是它的结果是什么呢？是它被中原文化给吞噬了。
Well, if we observe deeper in China's war history, whenever it is the most fierce wartime in the Chinese history, it was actually not the war initiated by the Chinese people. Usually it is invasions from other races or ethnic groups, such as the Mongolians or the Manchua people. And they invade the Chinese people, and the result is usually that they were assimilated by the Chinese.
从历史上讲，中国是一个内向的国家，而不是一个外向型的国家。
So I would say historically, China is more of inward-looking nation, not a outward-looking country.
延边问题，咱们私下交流。
We can talk in private about this Yan'an issue, Yanbian issue.
好，我来回答问题。我先回答虎子的这个第一个啊，就是虎子的第一个问题就是关于说中苏分裂就把苏联搞垮了。那么你看到的是，其实70年代苏联是越来越强。我好像没有这个意思，因为如果说中苏分裂立刻就把苏联搞垮了，那么中美之间就失去了这个联合的基础，就是你失去了一个共同对付苏联这个威胁的基础，那么中美关系呢就没法再发展下去。其实啊，这个
Yeah, let me answer Greg's first question about whether the China-Soviet Union relation split has caused the collapse of Soviet Union. And you mentioned that in 1970s, Soviet Union appeared to be quite powerful. But actually, in my book or in my presentation, I didn't mean to give you this impression that the split has caused the collapse of Soviet Union. Actually, it's just opposite, because Soviet Union remains strong, and it has provided a basis for the China-US alliance, because they now have a shared goal, which is to tackle the Soviet Union.
从这个国际舞台上来看啊，中苏分裂呢，我们可以说是造成了2个结果，一个就是社会主义阵营的分裂，一个是共产主义运动的分裂。
So on the international stage, we could say that the China-Soviet Union split has caused 2 consequences. One is this breakdown of the socialist bloc in the world. The second is the disappearance of the communism movement.
从社会主义阵营的角度上来讲，中国后来就是说我退出社会主义阵营，既然社会主义阵营还是以苏联为首，那么我退出。那么国际共运呢，是大多数国家都跟着苏联跑，因为中苏分裂以后，国际共运也发生分裂，产生了许多的左派的党、左派的组织。那么所以毛呢就说我要领导左派党进行，就另起炉灶，另外干了，造成了这个。
And on the socialist bloc front, China basically said that we're leading because the Soviet Union now is the leader of the socialist bloc. And on the international communism movement, we know that majority country used to follow the Soviet Union, but now there is this split. And there appear to be a number of leftist groups. And Mao Zedong said that I'm going to lead all these leftist groups and form a new organization.
那么从哪个角度来看中苏分裂对拖垮苏联是有影响的呢？就是说，中国呢，毛泽东要73年、74年，毛要建立一条线一大片一个国际反苏统一战线，他不断地向美国人强调，苏联的战略重点在欧洲，实际上呢就是动了美国的蛋糕，你影响了美国的利益，所以中国呢和美国是有联合的共同的基础的。那么这个中国当时邓小平啊，在这个会见美国的战略代表团的时候，其实他说了的话都是我所看到的文件73年、74年，中国一直在宣传的这种，就是说，苏联它实际上啊，它有，比如说它有400多万的军队，它有100多万放在这个苏中边境，那么还有3/4的兵力放在欧洲，所以可以看出它的重点在欧洲，它是声东击西。那么中国要和美国联合建立这么一个反苏统一战线。
So, but if we really want to find out what is the split's impact on the status of Soviet Union, and we need to look at 1973 and 1974, Mao came up with this one line and a big coverage of communities to fight against Soviet Union. And China kept telling Americans that Soviet Union had this focus on Europe, which is to try to remove your control in Europe, and it would kind of minimize your influence in Europe. So that kind of formed the basis for China and the U.S. alliance. And from the document that I have read, this document about 1973 and 1974, when Deng Xiaoping met with the U.S. delegation, and he told this U.S. delegation that among the 4 million military people that the Soviet Union has put, the 40,000, that they have put 10,000 on the China and Soviet Union border, and but for the rest, which is 3/4, they put them in Europe. That means they are really focusing the Europe. Their real attention is on Europe. So this is why I say that China is paving the way for the China-U.S. alliance.
就是毛泽东的这种认识中国的这种战略方针，实际上呢就使得苏联不得不就是来对付，就是抽出很大的力量来对付中国。所以我们也可以说从这个角度上讲，中苏分裂拖垮了苏联。
So because of Mao Zedong's strategic plan, and Soviet Union had no choice but to invest more energy and resources in dealing with China. So that's one angle from which I say that the China-Soviet Union split has caused the somehow collapse of Soviet Union.
那么，下边我回答那个小伙子你提的这个毛对修正主义的看法。我想你的这个呢，我可以和虎子后边那个问题，就是中苏分裂和文革有什么关系？这个我就联系起来解答。其实你说的这个修正主义，毛的看法呢，就是中苏两党主要的分歧，就是毛认为正统的马列主义强调的是我们现在所处的时代还是战争与革命的时代，那么要进行暴力革命，不能够走和平过渡的路线。而赫鲁晓夫时期呢，从1956年20大，他调整他的外交战略，与西方搞缓和，这样呢，就是中苏两党的分歧就越来越发展。
Now I'd like to answer this young gentleman's question about how Mao Zedong looked at Soviet Union's revisionism, and I would like to combine this answer with Greg's question: is what is a split impact on the Cultural Revolution? And at Mao's time, he thought that the major difference between the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union's Communist Party was how
中国人相信，韩国人相信，美国人也相信。我研究7年，看了所有的史料，我觉得不是这样。就不是人们理解的那种鲜血凝成的友谊，什么鲜血凝成的同盟，情况是比较复杂，就像我刚才讲的那样。友谊是有，但是互相也有猜忌，也有分歧，也有矛盾，但是他们不想让他们的敌人知道，他们的地缘政治要求他们对外是一种同盟的形象，所以大家都编造了一个神话，就讲了60年。
那现在朝鲜和美国之间，
这个他到底是倾向美国还是倾向中国？我觉得从心底上他谁都不相信，但是他两边都要利用。就像刚才我在会上讲的，就是金日成利用中苏之间的分歧和矛盾，寻找朝鲜的外交空间，道理是一样的。现在金正恩也在利用中美之间的这种矛盾和分歧来寻找朝鲜的外交空间、生存空间。
谢谢您。
打开明镜电视，每次都是新世界。节目中言论为个人见解，不代表明镜的观点或立场。YouTube 频道名明镜火拍，苹果博客名明镜火拍音频版，网站 www.minjingnews.com， 推特@minjingnews， 脸书 facebook.com